Hello, BookTube. All right, we're back for, I think this is installment number 5 of the 7.4K Q&A. We're just going to push on here. Perry Willis asks, do you have a favorite Superman writer? Probably overall it would be Carrie Bates from ye olden days. Andrew Russell says, these Q&A segments are a great feature of your channel. Why, thank you. I have a few questions. Number 1, where do you think the U.S. sits at the present moment in comparison to other periods in its history? And do you have hope that it will regain some kind of satisfactory equilibrium in the near future where we can all just more or less get along? This is the lowest point in American history and also a turning point in American history. This is the most important period in American history, not just for this country, but for the rest of the world. And no, an equilibrium will be found, but it won't be, can we all just get along? The United States is in the process right now of changing from a representative democracy into an autocracy. And I'm not saying that that will be all bad. I'm not saying that ordinary people like me won't be able to live in an autocracy and raise their kids in an autocracy, but it will be very, very different. People will just quietly stop referring to this country as the land as the home of the free, and will be arrested if they do. And it will be very different for the rest of the world. Those of you who live in other countries and think, well, what's going on in America only peripherally affects me. You will see, you won't see, but your children will see how different the world will be when America is just a villainous kleptocracy. Right now, in addition to all of the stuff that America does on the world stage and behind the curtains, there's also a kind has been kind of a ruling self-image. Americans like to be the good guy. We like to think of ourselves as the good guy. And I have always thought, but I never thought it was possible until 2016, I have always thought, heaven help the rest of the world if America stops wanting to be the good guy. And that is going to happen. So satisfactory equilibrium? It could be. It could be, but it won't be the same equilibrium. That is done. Question number 2 is, what has been the most terrifying moment in your life? I honestly don't have a single one, not just one moment. There are a few that stick out. One, I got a medical diagnosis once, years and years ago. That was pretty terrifying when I realized in that moment that it was real, that it was actually happening. One moment, I used to have a fat basset hound named Lucy. I adored her. She was my everything. And I used to lay on her. I used to use her as a pillow because she was big and fat and warm, and she liked to be there. She liked to be a pillow for me and her sister. And one time when she was about, I think, 10, I was laying on her reading, and I rolled my head to one side to sort of burble at her mouth because her mouth was right next to my face. And when I rolled my head over to the side, I felt on my ear a tumor. And I knew right away what it was. I knew right away that it was serious. I knew right away that it was her death just sitting there and that there was no way around it. So those would count. And there have been a couple of other moments. And then question number 3, what has been the most rewarding moment of your life? It hasn't been just one. There have been many, many rewarding moments. I try to have one every week if I can. William Fett asks, what are your opinions on the following writers? Colleen McCullough, I like her. She's a little wooden, but I like her. Taylor Caldwell, I like her. I like her a lot. Very, very good. Very purple, but very, very good. And Helene Hanff, fantastic. Love her. MNIKM says, would you say that Midnight's Children deserves the Booker of Bookers? No. Would you recommend other Rushdie novels to folks who have only read that one? Well, not a novel. I'd recommend Joseph Anton, his memoir. It's tremendously good. Tremendously good. And because it's nonfiction, because there are other people involved, because there's accountability involved, because it was the real world, a lot of his excesses as a writer are strictly controlled. I think that's why I loved it so much. I strongly recommend it. You'll like it, I bet. Mr. Putler Gollum says, can you recommend a book about capitalism? No. No. Maybe Crashed by Adam Tooze. It's a big, thick thing, but it's not about capitalism. It's about late-stage capitalism. It's about capitalism that has been greed-rigged to such a precarious state that it cannot last. The one impression you get when you come out of Crashed by Adam Tooze is that this can't last, and that the thing that will replace it will be a burnt from the ashes type replacement. It won't be that this needs to be adjusted a little in the next quarter. You get the impression that this is headed for the Gotterdammerung of all crashes, and that what rises from it will be fundamentally different. That's the impression I got anyway. You'd want to talk to David Murphy about the books on capitalism. Housekeeping says, do you think authors that take their literary influence mostly from writers like Stephen King, etc., can be better writers, or are people that follow bad writers bound to be bad? No. You can you can exceed your bad teachers. Definitely you can. Not saying that those our previously mentions are bad. Well, I am. Stephen King is bad. I haven't read them unless you recommend them. You should not read Stephen King. not anything by him. Let's see here. Perry Willis says, which way do you lean on the Shakespeare authorship question? Oh my. Well, I've done whole videos on this, and I think it's a hoot. I love it. I love the whole subject. And the furthest extent that I lean is to say there is merit to the question. Whenever I say this, I have people come out of the woodwork to say just droningly bad teacher style, eyes half closed, not listening, no intonation, say, no, there is no merit to the question. Here are my 5 breakdowns of why there are no merits to the question. Well, okay. But I'm an actual person, and I'm actually thinking, and I'm not stupid, and I've read all the material, and I say there's merit to the question. And I think that, to that extent, asking those kinds of questions is fascinating. Fascinating. Because at its heart, the Shakespeare authorship question, if it's not snobbery, if that's not what's motivating you, thinking that, there has to be a noble involved in this. If it's not snobbery that's motivating you, then what you are doing in the Shakespeare authorship question is vigorously interrogating historical documentation. And that is fun to do no matter what. No matter what. That is fun to do. So that's where the place I tend to come down on the Shakespeare authorship question is just loving it. I love the kinds of thinking that it makes people do. I just think it's fantastic. Tomorrow's Classic says, number 1, which are better, Robert E. Howard's boxing stories or Jane Grey's fishing stories? I'm assuming that is your joking parody of the kind of nonsensical question that I've been making fun of this whole Q&A session. Number 2, how would you rank Trollope's parliamentary novels best to worst? Okay, maybe I was wrong. Maybe these are legitimate questions. There is no way to say whether Howard's boxing stories are better than Grey's fishing stories, and nobody would rank the parliamentary novels in order best to worst. These are nonsensical questions. They're not going to yield anything. Hearing answers like that from me, even if I made up answers, would have no value at all. None. But I don't have any answers. Then the third question is, where does Obama rank in U.S. presidents? I would rank him pretty high. Patrick Kenny. Let's see here. I'm greedy and have 2 questions for you today. Well, as you can see, Patrick, 2 is not being greedy. Plenty of people have asked a lot more questions than that. Number 1, what importance would you give to the exercise of reading bad books in order to strengthen critical thinking? Oh my, it's invaluable. For instance, is it worth reading Steven Pinker's book, The Better Angels of Our Nature, a book you've publicly criticized as being bad, and I trust your judgment? Well, you don't have to trust my judgment on Better Angels of Our Nature. In Better Angels of Our Nature, Steven Pinker lays out his proposition that mankind is getting less violent because mankind is getting more intelligent. And he has a whole bunch of doctored and cherry-picked quasi-scientific studies to validate his assessment of his own gated community in Cambridge, Massachusetts. But you don't need to take my word for it. Ask yourself, is mankind getting less violent? Is mankind getting smarter? A child knows the book is junk. But anyway, would you recommend reading his book for this purpose, or is the reader's time better spent reading books? Well, okay, you say critical thinking. Okay, you phrase this in the context of critical thinking. And I want to stress here, not every reader is a critical reader, and they don't have to be. Reading just for fun, reading for personal enjoyment, reading to bawl your eyes out, reading with your lymph nodes, reading until your heart's in your throat, reading to be destroyed, all that kind of emotional falderall. There are plenty of readers who read like that exclusively. That's all they do. That's what they want from their books. And there's nothing wrong with that at all. That's fantastic. I love listening to those people. But you specifically invoke critical thinking. I'm assuming you mean by that critical reading. It's invaluable to read bad books, poorly done books, if you want to hone your critical reading. But if you say here, the last question is the reader's time better spent reading better books? It depends on which kind of reader you are. If you want to do critical critical reading, that kind of thing. If you want to sharpen that, then yeah, reading bad books, good books, indifferent books, enraging books is very good for engaging critical reading. But only that. If you want to read books that you're going to love, books that are effectively done, books that will move you, bad books tend not to do that. So you probably do want to steer clear of them, if that's the kind of reader that you are, because your reading time is limited. And question number 2, have you ever experienced a Christmas in a summertime? And if so, where were you? Well, literal summer or warm weather? I think I've probably done both. I've experienced Christmas in the Southern Hemisphere, and I've experienced Christmas in Texas and in California, where the weather was warm on Christmas Day. So I guess I've done both. John Petter says, have you ever been addicted to spy thrillers? Not really, no. I know so many people who are, but I like them, but I'm not. I know people who don't read anything else. I'm not one of them. Do you like David Ignatius and the rest? David Ignatius I particularly don't like. His books just don't get to me at all. Ted Bell, for instance, writes spy thrillers that I love. David Ignatius, they always seem extremely wordy and wooden and a little self-impressed. Given your facility for languages, have you ever been in the spy business? Well, I wouldn't tell you if I had, right? But no, I never have. Swellburn says, who is your favorite King Henry VIII wife and why? For me, that would be the last wife, Catherine Parr. And why is because she wasn't in it to be queen. She didn't think it was her right. She didn't think it was her privilege. She was in it for Henry's children. Mainly for Henry's children and to advance her intellectual causes. And maybe even a fugitive kind of affection for Henry, which was difficult to muster at that particular stage. She strikes me as the most three-dimensional, the most interior of Henry's wives, so it'd be Catherine Parr. Mary Tumulty says, please share your thoughts on symbolism and metaphors in literature. Do writers plan on using such devices, or is it something that evolves during the writing process? I imagine it evolves. You think of a simile or a metaphor, and then you think, well, I've heard that a million times, I better come up with a different one. I don't have any real extensive thoughts on their use in literature. Gene Miller says, please give us names of several authors who think you think are unfairly forgotten. We get a taste of some of this in the Daily Penguins, but like Oliver Twist, I want more. Well, Gil Sorrentino is everybody's standard answer to this. He's completely forgotten by the general reading public, and he shouldn't be. Martha Gellhorn is remembered as a wife of Henry VIII, of Ernest Hemingway, when she should be remembered as a great novelist. Not a reporter, a great novelist. She's a better novelist than Hemingway, and thanks to him, largely, she's not remembered as that. Frances Parkinson Keyes, maybe a little bit outdated here, but she wrote a whole bunch of books, and quite a few of them are very good, especially later in her career. Joy Street is a very good novel, and she's not remembered at all. She's not in print at all anymore. Same thing with the historian, Perry Miller, wrote a whole bunch of stuff on New England Transcendentalism and a whole bunch of works, very thoughtful works of history that I don't think anyone remembers anymore. I don't think they're in print anymore. I could go on and on. Forgotten authors, I could go on and on. Nicole says, I'm curious to know if you are ordering vegan, vegetarian food on occasion. And if so, do you have a favorite restaurant in Boston? Ordering food during a pandemic? No. Are there vegetarian ready-made meals available in America in general, those that you microwave or warm up in a pot? I have no idea. I assume that if there were, they'd be very expensive and heavily salted. I'd prefer just to make my own. It's easy to do. Easy to do. Also, is there a starter kit for why you shouldn't eat animals? Or are a series with dog or canine books, moose, shark, and yak? I should do a dog-related starter kit book set. I should do that. I will do that soon when I revive starter kits. And as to you shouldn't eat animals, why do you need a starter kit? That's the thing that I've never understood this. People say to me, I'm thinking about not eating animals anymore. Do you have a book you can recommend? How about their screams? Is that good? Will that do instead of a book? How about their screams? How about their cries of misery? Living their whole lives being on a chain link fence in a box as big as a shoebox, with chain link above them as well, so that when the person above them pees and defecates, it comes through the chain link onto them. And you can't turn around. You can't stand up. You can't shake it off. You can't move. You just have to let it sit on you and fester on you. And occasionally you have body parts removed, or you have your children removed. And you're screaming and crying the whole time because you know perfectly well this wasn't meant to be your life. You know perfectly well that you have urges to do other things like run around or socialize or sleep in peace or nap or play practical jokes. How about the cries of misery of those people? Is that good enough to make you not want to eat animals anymore? Those are the people you're eating. You're eating people who are doing that. They're tortured for months, sometimes years, before they become your food. And in between the torturing and the food, they're butchered alive and with no anesthesia. So the end isn't peaceful either. There's no need for a book. You're either a willing part of a machinery of unbelievable cruelty or you're not. Now, if you are, fine, because you have all the power, you can be. I would say two things. One, it morally debases you to be part of such a system. And two, if you knowingly are part of such a system and your reason is because you're the one inflicting the system on others, then I don't want to hear a word out of you when someone inflicts a system like that on you. You must just be quiet. Because you were part of it when it was you doing it to somebody else. Plus, you'll feel better, too. Lighter, clearer brain, you'll feel better without eating people. So, I mean, if I don't have a book to recommend. I know that the standard book to recommend here is Animal Liberation by Peter Singer. If you want to read that, you can. But much better would be for you to meet a pig. I'm sure that's not impossible. Even during a pandemic, I'm sure that you could go to a petting zoo and meet a pig. Spend maybe half an hour with a pig. Bet you've never done that. For however many pigs you've eaten, I bet you've never done that. Spend time with a chicken. A nice, calm chicken, and not a chicken who's stressed out. Give the chicken a little time to get to know you and then spend time with it. Spend time with a cow. A peaceful cow in a field surrounded by other cows. Spend time with that cow. You'll know the moment the cow likes you because the cow will tell you that. You'll know that cow's personality as opposed to the personalities of everyone else around it. I think if you do enough of that, you won't want to eat those people anymore. You especially won't want them tortured for years just to satisfy a taste. That's all. Let's just move on. Pietro Tripodi has a number of questions. Number one, what's your favorite book written by a Brazilian author? Why, Clarice Lispector, of course. No, it'd be Jorge Amado. Doña Flor and Her Two Husbands, maybe, or pretty much anything by Jorge Amado. I think he's fantastic. Number two, could you give us some basic tips on someone interested in learning Latin? How much time does it take to be able to read Ovid or Virgil? Well, there's reading and there's reading. You wouldn't need more than a few months of studying Latin every day. Study it every day, use it every day, write sentences every day. Don't just read, don't just memorize, but also use it. A couple of months of that, I'm sure there are free tutorials online. A couple of months of that and you'll be able at least to know what Ovid or Virgil are saying. They're extremely complex writers and they're using Latin at a virtuoso level. So you won't be able to appreciate all of that right away, but you'll at least, the door will be open. They suddenly won't be a foreign language to you anymore, and that's not that long, so I recommend it. Question number three, how was the experience of living in Venice like for you? I loved it. Absolutely loved it. Do you consider the possibility of living there again? No. No, my traveling days are over. And besides, first of all, Italy isn't currently taking Americans, but I am living in my favorite place. Boston is my favorite place. Why would I go to number two? I guess if something happened to number one, but otherwise, no. And number four, I know that you were quite reluctant to recommend Dryden's selected poems, but I bought them nonetheless. What are your favorite poems by him? Again, with the favorites. I'm happy to hear that you're exploring Byron, Dryden. I'd much rather know your favorites than tell you mine. I don't really have. I mean, there are some that I really like, some that I like more than others, but favorites? I don't really think that way. I don't really categorize my writing that way. So I'm just going to pass on that. We'll just move on to Arto Disk. Let's see here. Who has a barrage of questions here. How are we doing for time? Okay, well, let's finish up with this one. Why did you never publish any of your novels? You've been tantalizing us mentioning here and there that you wrote some gargantuan historical novels, and also that you plan on writing a similarly sized autobiography. Will any of these ever be published? I might publish the autobiography. I'm getting a lot of needling in that regard. The books, the novels, I wrote them just for enjoyment. It's so enjoyable to write a novel. I can't explain it to those who haven't tried it. It is so enjoyable to write and finish a novel that once I experienced it one time, I knew I had to keep doing it. But I'm not willing to go through the rigor. I wasn't willing to go through the rigmarole of the normal, traditional, submit to an agent, submit to a publisher, all that sort of stuff. I wasn't willing to do that at all. In the meantime, the digital world has popped up, and now all of a sudden it's possible for me to just clean these things up and publish them, and I should think more about doing that. I think I heard you say that you plan on publishing the autobiography. I do. What about the novels, though? Well, maybe. Maybe I will. There's quite a few of them by now. And I would need to have them professionally edited. I would need to learn more than I already know about the indie book publishing world. Question number 2. On a different note, what do you think of John Israel's now tetralogy on the Enlightenment? I like it. Question number 3. For how many hours do you actually sleep every day? 3 or 4? Yeah, 3 or 4. Or do you even skip a day once in a while? I can, and sometimes do, skip days. Especially when Lucy was sick. When Lucy was dying. That was really bad. She needed to urinate every 15 minutes and she'd been such a good girl for her whole life in terms of waiting to go outside that she didn't want to go inside. Some of you remember those videos. It had been days since I'd slept in those. Have you always needed little sleep, or have you trained yourself to do so? No training involved. No, you can't do that. Number 4, will you ever do a Middlemarch read-along? I think so. I think I will. Number 5, what are your thoughts on Daniel Deronda? I like it very much. And number 6, okay, I'll be gone for now. Okay, all right, 6 is good. Let's see here. Mursalin Morsadek says, what are your favorite books written by a South Asian author? Good Lord. Well, if we're talking India and Pakistan, then it's hundreds of different authors. I could make a series of videos. I can't narrow it down in one Q&A. Jem says, I have a question for a future Q&A. If a self-published Cornwall-based author of 3 local illustrated storybooks, she's self-published, and which have jointly sold 20,000+ copies over the years, would you read them or bin them or pass them on? I think there's a verb missing there, right? If such an author were to send me those books, would I read them or bin them or pass them on? Well, I would read them, of course. I read everything that I'm sent. As my friend Deb has told you on this channel, and Sam and a whole bunch of other people told you, I will read anything. If I read everything I'm sent, so I would read them. Whether I bin them or pass them on after that would entirely depend on the books, now wouldn't it? Let's see here. Edmund Burke, do you have a short story about traveling in Chile that you are willing to share? Oh God, I did a lot of traveling in Chile. Valparaiso, for instance. The city I fell in love with in Chile was not Santiago, it was Valparaiso. And oh God, everything about that city I just loved. The Natural History Museum, I spent so much time in the Natural History Museum there, but also the beaches. Everything about Valparaiso I just loved. I just thought it was fantastic. No specific stories. I had a lot of street dogs. This was a long time ago, very long time ago. There were a lot of street dogs that I picked up there. That I didn't keep them, of course. I picked them up. They were my friends. They were my companions. I shared my food and lodgings with them while I was there with my dogs. And then when it was over, I sent them right back to their lives, and I came home with my dogs. But that was my standard arrangement with stray dogs wherever I went was, I can't save you. I can't have 500 dogs back home. I can't do anything for you other than treat you for the time that we know each other the way you have always deserved to be treated and never have been. So I will give you a bath. I will cuddle with you. You will share a bed with a human. You will share a bed with me in a crowd of dogs the way you were meant to. No worrying about someone killing you at night or anything like that. No sleeping on stone. I'll feed you until you're bursting. All fresh water that you could possibly want. And you will spend days conversing with your king. I will give you that, and at least you'll have that. And then I'll go. And at least you'll have had that for a little while. But I took that crowd everywhere in Chile, but I couldn't take them into the museum. There was one dog, there was a guy at the museum who was very kindly. I had one beagle at the time who was very old, 20 years old, and he was allowed to come in with me. But everybody else had to wait. Let's see here. Claude H. says, what are your thoughts on Aulus Gellius, a Roman author? Those of you who don't know Aulus Gellius, a minor Roman author, wrote a book called Attic Nights. That's just a collection of bits and pieces, anecdotes and tidbits. Very entertaining. Aulus Gellius is very entertaining. And have you ever spoken or written in Latin? Why, yes, I've done both. James Holder says, what do you think is the biggest problem facing the comic books today? I watch a lot of Comicsgate YouTube videos, and I watch a lot of anti-Comicsgate YouTube videos. And the one thing I think that Comicsgate gets right is that the main problem facing the comic book industry today is that they're pursuing a political agenda rather than serving up the comics that the admittedly small and dwindling fan base that will buy them actually want to read. Instead, actively antagonizing that fan base. Well, if you do that, you're going to hurt your industry, and you're going to produce lots of crap. And good Lord, every time I look at a current comic book, virtually every time, certainly every Marvel comic book, but a lot of DC comic books too, every time I look at a current comic book, they're just incomprehensibly bad. So maybe there's some truth to that. One way or another, I largely don't bother with it anymore. I largely just do the collections and trade paperback route rather than follow any individual issues. Lucky thing too, because the pandemic shut down the comic shop. I would buy Byron Michael Bendis' Legion comic if I went to the comic shop. Peter Prablo, how are we doing for time? All right, we'll just do him. Is there a single book or an online resource that traces the networks of books from antiquity that authenticate each other? The discovery of lost books from antiquity was the hot thing for a while in the Renaissance, so why wouldn't some wily humanist just invent the works of, say, Tacitus? Even your buddy, the great Dutch humanist Erasmus, apparently tried to pass something he wrote off as by St. Cyprian. I never thought I would have to say this on BookTube, but it would be nice if you didn't try to instruct me about what Erasmus tried and did not try to do. But my understanding is that scholars use information from other works to prove that a certain work is from a specific time, and I was just wondering if anyone has ever mapped it all out. I think it would make for an amazingly big book illustrated with charts and such personally. P.S. I don't mean carbon dating. Well, I imagine it would make a great... I don't know of any book on the subject or any web, online provenance site or anything like that. I guess it would make an interesting story. Somebody must have written such a book on that subject. Probably Jason Harrigan knows the answer better than I would. Let's stop here and move on. We'll move on to the next one. So I'll wrap this up and we'll be right back.